Imagine this: two college dropouts hunched over a wooden workbench in a cluttered suburban garage, surrounded by wire clippings and circuit boards, with barely $300 between them. One is a perfectionist who believes computers should be beautiful. The other is a technical wizard who can build anything from scratch. It's 1976, and they're about to make a decision that will birth a company worth over $3 trillion. But here's what nobody tells you about that famous garage. It wasn't where Apple was actually born, and the real story of how this tech giant came to life is far more dramatic, messy, and inspiring than the polished legend we've all heard. What really happened in those early days? How did a wooden computer kit with no keyboard or monitor become the foundation of the world's most valuable company? The truth will surprise you. The story doesn't begin in a garage. It begins in a classroom at Homestead High School in Cupertino, California, where a mutual friend introduced Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1971. Jobs was just 16, charismatic and restless. Wozniak, 5 years older, was already working at Hewlett-Packard and had a reputation as an electronics genius. Their friendship was unlikely but powerful, built on a shared obsession with technology and a knack for mischief. Their first collaboration wasn't a computer at all. It was an illegal device called the Blue Box, a tone generator that could hack telephone networks and make free long-distance calls. Wozniak designed it based on instructions published in Esquire magazine, and Jobs immediately saw its commercial potential. They built and sold about 200 of these boxes for $150 each, walking through Berkeley dorms late at night to find customers. It was technically illegal, but for Jobs, it proved something crucial: Wozniak could invent, and he could sell. This partnership would define everything that came next. By 1975, Wozniak was spending his evenings at the Homebrew Computer Club, a gathering of electronics enthusiasts in Menlo Park who shared ideas about building personal computers. The concept itself was revolutionary. At that time, computers were massive, expensive machines owned by corporations and universities. The idea that an individual could own a computer seemed absurd to most people. But at Homebrew, dreamers and engineers were trying to make it happen. Wozniak attended these meetings and became inspired to design his own machine. Using his deep knowledge of circuit design, he created what would become the Apple I, a computer that was radically simpler and cheaper than anything else available. While competitors like the Altair 8000 required dozens of chips, Wozniak's brilliant engineering reduced the chip count dramatically, making it both affordable and elegant. He wasn't thinking about starting a company. He just wanted to impress his friends at the club. Steve Jobs saw something different. When Wozniak showed him the completed board in early 1976, Jobs immediately recognized its commercial potential. He convinced a reluctant Wozniak that they should start a company and sell the computer as a fully assembled printed circuit board. Wozniak was comfortable at Hewlett-Packard and initially resistant, but Jobs persisted. He argued that even if they failed, they'd at least have the experience of running their own company. Wozniak finally agreed, and on April 1, 1976, Apple Computer Company was officially founded. Now here's where the garage comes in, but not the way you think. Steve Jobs was living with his parents, Paul and Clara Jobs, at their home on Chris Drive in Los Altos. The garage became their operations center, but the actual work of building the Apple I happened in multiple locations. Wozniak did much of the design work at his apartment and at his desk at Hewlett-Packard. Jobs' bedroom served as the planning headquarters. His sister Patty's bedroom became the shipping department. The garage was primarily used for testing and final assembly. It's become a mythic symbol, but the reality was much more distributed and chaotic. To fund their venture, both Steves made sacrifices. Jobs sold his Volkswagen van for $1,500. Wozniak sold his beloved Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator for $250. With this modest capital and a third partner named Ronald Wayne, who handled documentation and had a 10% stake, Apple was in business. Wayne would famously sell his stake just 12 days later for $800, walking away from what would eventually be worth billions, because he was older and couldn't handle the financial risk Jobs was taking on. Their first major break came from Paul Terrell, owner of the Byte Shop, one of the first computer retail stores in America. Jobs walked into Terrell's shop and pitched the Apple I. Terrell was intrigued but said he didn't want to sell circuit boards that customers had to assemble themselves. He wanted fully assembled computers he could sell to regular people. Jobs returned and boldly offered to sell him 50 fully assembled units. Terrell agreed and placed an order for 50 computers at $500 each, for a total of $25,000. There was just one problem. Apple didn't have the money to buy parts. Jobs convinced a local electronics supplier to give him 30 days of credit on the components, promising payment when the Byte Shop order was fulfilled. It was a calculated gamble. For the next 30 days, Jobs, Wozniak, and a small crew including Jobs' sister and his pregnant girlfriend worked around the clock. They hand-soldered components, assembled boards, and tested each unit. Wozniak even continued his day job at Hewlett-Packard, working on Apple in the evenings and weekends. They delivered all 50 units to Terrell on time. However, there was a disconnect in expectations. Terrell wanted complete computers with keyboards and monitors. What Apple delivered were assembled motherboards that still required customers to supply their own cases, keyboards, power supplies, and displays. Nevertheless, Terrell accepted them and paid the invoice. Apple had made its first significant sale, and the company survived its first crisis. The Apple I ultimately sold about 200 units at a retail price of $666.66. The unusual pricing was Wozniak's idea based on his love of repeating digits, though it later attracted unwanted attention from religious groups who associated the number with biblical prophecy. But the Apple I was never meant to be a mass-market success. It was a proof of concept, a stepping stone. By late 1976, Wozniak was already designing something far more ambitious, the Apple II. This machine would have color graphics, sound, expansion slots, and eventually a plastic case designed by Jerry Manock. It would be a complete, user-friendly computer that anyone could use right out of the box. But developing and manufacturing it would require serious capital, far more than garage sales and small orders could provide. This led Jobs to pursue venture capital, a relatively new concept at the time. After being rejected by Atari founder Nolan Bushnell and others, Jobs was introduced to Mike Markkula, a retired Intel engineer who had made millions from stock options. Markkula saw the potential immediately. In January 1977, he invested $92,000 of his own money and secured a credit line of $250,000. In return, he received 1/3 of the company. Markkula also brought discipline, business planning, and critical industry connections. With Markkula's investment, Apple Computer incorporated in January 1977 and moved out of the garage into a proper office on Stevens Creek Boulevard in Cupertino. The garage had served its symbolic purpose, representing the humble beginnings that would become central to Apple's mythology. But the real work of building a company was happening now, with real money, real employees, and real stakes. The Apple II launched in April 1977 at the West Coast Computer Fair, and it was a sensation. Priced at $1,298, it was expensive but offered unprecedented capabilities. Early sales were steady, but the breakthrough came in 1979 with the release of VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet program, which ran exclusively on the Apple II. Suddenly, businesses had a reason to buy personal computers. Sales exploded. By 1980, Apple had gone public in the most successful initial public offering since Ford Motor Company in 1956. The stock offering created more instant millionaires than any company in history to that point. Steve Jobs, just 25 years old, was worth over $200 million on paper. Wozniak became similarly wealthy. The two college dropouts who started with $300 had created a billion-dollar company in less than 4 years. And that's the real story of Apple's beginning. Not a sanitized fairy tale, but a messy, improbable journey fueled by genius, salesmanship, risk-taking, and perfect timing. From illegal phone hacking devices to a $3 trillion empire, it's proof that world-changing companies often start with nothing more than a wild idea and the courage to pursue it. If you found this deep dive into tech history fascinating, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Hit that like button if you learned something new today, and drop a comment telling us which tech origin story you want us to cover next. We've got plenty more untold stories waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.